Boker. Today's Daf Yomi is Kesubos Mem Beis. We're going to start on the bottom of Mem Aleph from a Beis as we start with the new chapter, the fourth chapter of Maseches Kesubos. And we start as follows with the Mishnah. Nara Shenispatata. Let's say you have a Nara, a adolescent girl who was seduced. Her father gets her humiliation money, her depreciation money, and also the penalty, the 50 shekel that's assigned by the Torah that the seducer has to pay. All of that goes to the father. V'atzar, and the pain, remember we had discussed whether or not there was pain if she was assaulted, the pain of being thrown on the ground, or the pain of her legs being hurt. Hatzar bitfusa. So the assault of the almana, the assault, the anusa of the nara goes to the father as well. Amda bedin achal mesav. So let's say she goes to court before the father dies. Hare hein shoav. Then the money goes to the father. Mesav. Let's say she went to court and then her father died. Harain shoachen. Then the money goes to the brothers who inherit the father. Let's say she wasn't able to go to court and the father died before she was able to go to court. Then she's the one who collects the money, because then it's not part of the inheritance. Then she's the one who collects it. Let's say she went to court before she became an adult. Harayin shoav, then the money goes to her father. Mesav, harayin shoachin. And so too, if her father dies, the money goes to the brothers. But let's say she was unable to go to court before she became an adult. Harayin shoatzma. Then she collects the money herself. Rabbi Shimon argues with the Tanakama. Rabbi Shimon says, let's say she went to court. The court ruled for her, and so therefore her father was supposed to collect it, but her father died before she could collect it. Harei hein shoatzma. Then she collects it herself, because, as Rashi says, even though she went to court, it's not going to be considered the money of the father until he actually collects it. And the Gemara is going to explain the reasoning for Rabbi Shimon. And now we say on the top of Mem Beis and the Aleph, her salary and her lost objects, even though she hasn't yet collected them. How we're going to have to see how that works with the lost object. But once her father dies, and those belong to the brother. So the Gemara first says, on the top of Mem Beis and Aleph, my Kamash Milan, what is this Mishnah even teaching us? It's already all taught before back on Daf Yomi test. Tanina, we learned Tamafata, no sin Shaloshat Varma on this Arba. We already learned the seducer has to give the three things: the Kinas, the Boshas, and the Pagam, and the Ones has to give four, because you add on the Tsar, the pain. Mafata knows saying the Mafata gives Boshas, Pagam, and Kinas, humiliation, depreciation, and the penalty. Most if we have Ones, Shanosin as Tsar. So the onus has an additional penalty that he has to give the pain. So why is our Mishnah just repeating the previous Mishnah? So the Gemara says, "Lavia itzrichlei." Well, we need the din. Our Mishnah teaching us the din that it goes to the father. The Gemara says, "Lavia nami pshita." It's also obvious that it goes to the father. Midikayayev mefate. From the fact that our Mishnah is talking about the fact that a seducer gives, it's obvious that it goes to the father, because the ila atzma, if it will be going to herself, amayayev. Why would the seducer have to pay if the money goes to the girl? The seducer acquiesced to this relationship. She was a willing participant. Those questions. But don't we say in general that you actually can't be a willing participant if you're a minor? Excuse me. If that's the case, that's what Tosfos question and Tosfos raises. We'll leave that aside for now, because Gemara says it's obviously not talking about. It's obviously the money that goes to her father. So the Gemara explains Amda bedin itzrichoi. Pukta de Rabbi Shimon Rabbanan. So no, the reason why we need this Mishnah is one because of the chiddush of the dispute of the last part between Rabbi Shimon and the Rabbanan in a situation where she was where the case had already gone to court and they ruled for the girl, but the father died before he could collect the money. That the Rabbanan say that money is the brothers and the brothers inherited, whereas Rabbi Shimon says no, that money because she is not because it has not yet been collected, it goes to the girl because the father hasn't collected yet. Hold on 1 second. Okay, we continue. So says the Gemara, Tanan Hasan, we learned, now we're going to go into the world of Masechah Shavuos. We learned if a person says, Anasta ufitit as BT, he says to the person, you assaulted and you seduced my daughter, whereas the assaulter and the seducer will call him Shimon. So Ruvain accuses Shimon, you assaulted and you seduced my daughter. And Shimon says, no, lo nasti lo patiti. He says, I never did that such a thing. So he says, mashbiachani. So he says, I make you take an oath. Take an oath that indeed you never did it. And Shimon says, Amen. Shimon takes the oath. And then Shimon says, you know what? I was lying. I admit it. So in general, we have this concept called an Asham Gazelle, where if you stole something and then you swore that you didn't steal it, and then you take an oath that you have to pay back the principal, the Karen, plus you pay back an extra fifth, plus you bring a carbon. So in this case, where he denies the kanas, he denies the action, which would result in a kanas, and then he admits it afterwards. So then the Tana Kama says he's liable. Shimon Poter. And Shimon says he's exempt because he doesn't. This is a kanas. Sheino Meshan kanas al piyatzim, because he's the one who admits it, and we know Modav kanas is Poter. And the one who admits to a penalty is exempt if it's a punitive penalty. So Rabbi Shimon says you're Poter here. So Amar, so the rabbi said back to Rabbi Shimon, yeah, correct. You're right. You don't pay a kanas on your own basis of mashan poshes upagamo payasmo, but you do pay humiliation and depreciation on the basis of his own testimony. And so, therefore, in this case, he has to pay humiliation and depreciation. He would have had to pay humiliation, depreciation. So, therefore, he has to bring the carbon shvua and the extra 1/5. So, by minay. Abaye miraba. So Abaye. So that's a dispute. The dispute between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Shimon is when this person says you assaulted and seduced my daughter. According to Rabbi Shimon, he's making a claim about the kanas, and therefore he's exempt from the carbon. Whereas the Rabbanan are saying no, his basic claim is about the boshas and the pagam. Therefore, he's going to have to bring the carbon and pay the extra 1/5. So Abaye miraba. So Abaye asked the question from Rabba. Rashi says here, this was his Rebbe, Rabbi Bar Nachmani, who was his teacher. Why is it so relevant that this was his teacher? Why is Rashi telling this? My theory is, I haven't seen this in the Rishonim, but my theory is based upon the end of the Gemara where it talks about Rabba and Rabbi Yosef were the Rosh Yeshiva, and they couldn't answer a question. Rabba couldn't answer a question for 22 years. So once shown this context of the discussion, this was a discussion in the yeshiva between Abaye and Rabba, and it lasted for 22 years. So somebody says to his friend, let's say Ruvain accuses Shimon, he says, he says, you assaulted, you seduced my daughter, and he says, I took you to court. Not only did you assault and seduce her, I took you to the court. And the court said, you owe me the money. And Shimon says, no, he denies everything. He says, I don't owe you anything. And then he takes an oath, and then Bahoda, and now he admits. So does he have to bring the carbon shvua? Rabbi Shimon, according to Rabbi Shimon, who said in the previous case, he doesn't have to bring a carbon shvua because he was moda on a kanas, he was admitting to a kanas. What would Rabbi Shimon say in this case? Since he actually was adjudicated in the court, do we say Mimona Habe that it's a compensatory claim now because it's a tried case? Umechayev ho'al carbon shvua, and therefore it's compensatory. So now this guy has to bring, Shimon would have to bring a carbon shvua, and also Shimon would have to bring carbon shvua and pay an extra fifth. Odilma, or perhaps we say Afagav the Amma Bedin, or maybe Rabbi Shimon would say, even though it went to court, it's still at its source, at its root, it's a kanas. At its root, it's still a penalty, a punitive damage, and therefore he's exempt. Amarei, so Rabbi responds to Abaye, Mimona Habi. It's actually compensatory, and so even according to Rabbi Shimon, he'd have to bring the carbon shvua, Machayva carbon shvua. And so now, and he would have to bring the carbon shvua. And Abaye hears his Rabbi say this. Abaye launches into a series of ace-face. So the Gemara says the first ace-face. So Abaye challenges Rabbi. Do you really say that Rabbi Shimon says if you deny the kanas, it's after it went to court, that it's really mamona and not kanasa? But don't we have the following brisa? Rabbi Shimon says, Yacho Omer Chavero, I might think somebody says to his friend, Anastu Fatita Espiti, that somebody says to his friend, you assaulted and you seduced my daughter, and the friend responds, no, lo Anasti, lo Patiti, I never did it. And or Reuben says to Shimon, hey, Mishor Chasabdi, your ox killed my slave. Another case of a kanas of 30 shekel normally. And Shimon responds, oh, my loimis, he never did it. Oh, Shemar Arlo, Abdu, or a slave says to him, he palte Shina, you knocked out my tooth, Simita, Zaini, you knocked out my eye. The other case of kanas, because the Avid would go free, there, and Shimon says, oh, palte lo simiti, I never did any of those things. Vinishba. And then Shimon swears. And then as a result of him taking this oath, he then is hodeh, he admits it. So I might think he's liable under those cases he's liable for the payment, meaning to say that it's mamona because it had gone to court, because he says, hold on one second. I might think he's liable under those cases. Leave aside the going to court, leave that out of it. I might think he's liable. That you deny that when we talk about the case of the carbon shvua, it's where you deny your friend's pawn, to masyad, or his loan, or begezel, or theft, or or withheld wages, or if he found the lost object, or sheker. So so all those cases, says Shimon Miuchad and Shein Mammon, all those cases are compensatory. Afkol Shein Mammon. When do we say the carbon shvua applies? Only to a case of compensatory. Yatu Elu Shein Kanas. It excludes this case, which is a case of a fine. And so therefore, Rabbi Shimon says that when it comes to a kanas, there's no carbon shvua. Now Rabbi, given his ruling to Abaye in a case where it had already gone to court, and the court ruled that you owed the money, and now the person denied it. But what's this case of the brisa? If this case of the brisa is referring to where it's already gone to court, well, then it's a direct contradiction to Rabba's ruling, because Rabba ruled there it was mamona, and here Rabba says kanas. So what's this case referring to? It says about my Rav Shama, but then isn't where the case that it's already gone to court, and Rabbi Shimon clearly says that you're not chayav the carbon shvua because it's kanas and not mamona, or on top of 42b. Versus no, it's not a contradiction, because this case Rabbi Shimon says it's kanas, it's b'shalom abedin. It's where the court hadn't yet ruled that you're chayav. The Gemara says, but that's not. You can't say that, says Abaye. To back to Rabbah, maybe the Reisha b'shalom abedin. But we know from that price that the first clause of that price is where they had already gone to court. And so, from the fact that in the first case they had already gone to court, safe and now then it makes sense to say that this case also Rabbi Shimon's referring to is where they've gone to court. The Katani Reisha, because what does the first clause say? I only know that you bring a carbon shvua on those things where you pay the principal. But how do we know that in those cases also you pay the carbon shvua? Because from the actual word of ma'al, it teaches us that you pay the Carbon shvua. Now, hechidami idu alma bedin. What's that case referring to? If it had not gone to court, then what double payment is there? So it's very obvious that the Reisha is talking about a case. The first clause of there is talking about he went to court and the court ruled that you owe the penalty. And so there we're saying, according to the Reisha, we're saying that you have to bring the carbon shvua even in the case of a knas. And for the fact that the first case where it says you have to bring in carbon shvua in a case of a knas, it must be safe and now that the concluding clause where Rabbi Shimon says you don't have to bring a carbon shvua in a case of a knas is also after it was Amad B'din. It's also after it had gone to the court and the court ruled. So we see that Rabbi Shimon in this brisa says because Amad B'din, when it went to the court, he rules it's still a knas and not Mimona like Rabbah tried to rule. So Rabbah responds to Abai, he says, listen, Yachilna, if I wanted L'shanuya Reisha, if I wanted to, I could say, listen, I could say, yeah, the first clause of that brisa, which says that it's kfela is, and the first clause there, which it said that even though it's knas, there's a carbon shvua, I could have said that's a case where it had gone to court, and therefore it's compensatory. Huseifa b'shalom abedin. In the latter clause, it's where it had not gone to court. V'kur Rabbi Shimon. And I could have said that they're both reflecting Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says if it went to court, it's mamon. If it didn't go to court, it's not mamon. I could have pigeonholed my way into that reading of the text. But ushniya dechiko lo mishanina. But I didn't want to say that because even though I could have said it, that's not the way of the Torah. The Torah's way is not we just try to give any argument to defend ourselves. It has to be the right argument. And that would be a forced reading. I'll tell you why it's a forced reading. The im came, obviously, because you could have said to me, listen to Reisha Rabbi Shimon Omer. Then the Reisha, the first clause could have said Rabbi Shimon taught. Or listen to Seifa Divrei Rabbi Shimon. Or the latter clause could have said, this is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. But from the fact that it doesn't use such language, so from the fact that it doesn't use such language, it's clear that this is not entirely Rabbi Shimon. So from the fact that the Rabbi Shimon Omer is just coming in at the beginning of the Seifa, it's very clear that the Reisha is not Rabbi Shimon, because otherwise it would have said at the beginning of the Reisha Rabbi Shimon Omer, or at the end of the Seifa, it would be Rabbi Shimon. So it's a forced reading to say that they're both reflecting positions of Rabbi Shimon. One is where he says it's Mamona is when it was Amad B'din, and when he says it's not Mamona is when it was not Amad B'din. That would be a forced reading. So therefore, Ella Kuash Amad B'din. So really I have to say that the whole thing is where it was adjudicated in the court. And the Reisha, which says it is and in the Reisha, which says that it was considered to be Mimona, that's the position of the Rabbanim. That's the rabbis who say that if it was Amad B'din, it's Mimona, and so therefore it's compensatory and he has to bring a carbon shvua. Whereas the Seifa, which says it's a kinas, even though it was Amad B'din, that's Rabbi Shimon. Okay, so I'm changing my mind, says Rabbi. Modino L'cha, I'll admit to you that with respect to carbon shvua, in carbon shvua, patri. That was when it comes to a carbon shvua, I'll admit to you that after it was it gone to court, that the Torah says that Kuash Amadin and the Seifa is Rabbi Shimon. Umodino Chala Inyan Carbon Shmua, and I'll grant to you that Rabbi Shimon says that after it goes to court, it's still not going to be considered Memona, Rachpana Patre Mivachichesh. Because the Torah exempts a knas even after court from a carbon shvua. So I change it back and I say Rabbi no longer says that case would be compensatory. So why did I say Memona? Chikamina Memona. Why? With what respect? With respect to carbon shvua, it's still knas. So what did I mean when I said it's Memona? Well, Risho Abanav, that if the court ruled that this was a penalty, You wouldn't have to bring a korban shvu on that basis, but the penalty would be bequeathed to his children. And normally we would say that once you go to court and he dies before it was collected, nevertheless, it's like the brothers and not hers, and it could be inherited by the brothers. And that's what I meant by mamona. So Abaya is not going to let it go. He challenges Rab about that too. Would you say that if there's a kinas adjudicated in court that it can be inherited by the brothers? So Esvei, Rabbi Shimon Omer, we learned that Rabbi Shimon says in our Mishnah, what does he say? He says, "In lo ispiko ligvos ad shamesaav." If the girl was unable to collect the money, it says in our Mishnah, until the father dies, harehin shel atzma, then she gets to keep the money. Vi amris mamon have. But if you're saying, Rabbi Shimon, that if once it was adjudicated in the court, it's mamon and it's bequeathed to the brothers. If that's your argument, why does she get to keep it in the case it was adjudicated, but she didn't collect it yet, but it wasn't collected yet? Why does it get to belong to her? Rabbi Shimon says it's mamona and it's bequeathed to the brothers. So this was a question that Abaye asked his Rebbe Rabbi in the yeshiva. And Amar Rava was Abaye's Chabrusa, says, Hi Milsa, Kashi Bar Rabba Rabbi Yosef Ezra Tartan Shani. Rabbi Rabbi Yosef used to come to the yeshiva, and for 22 years, this question was hanging over them. Miloi Parik, and all the time that Rabbi was a Rosh Yeshiva, for those 22 years, which we read about at the end of Gemara and Brachos, that whole time, nobody gave an answer. Ad Yasef Rabbi Yosef Bereisha, until after Rav died, and the Gemara tells us the expression, Malach Rabbi Yosef took over, and Rabbi Yosef became the Rosh Yeshiva, Upirka, and he answers the question. Again, what's the question? The Rabbah said, when I said, Rabbi Shimon says, with respect to the Kanas, it becomes Mamona after the court ruled, and then before it was collected, that the money could be bequeathed to the brothers like a Kanas. But what about our Mishnah? According to Rabbi Shimon, what about our Mishnah? Rabbi Shimon says that if it was ruled that way in court, she gets to collect it if the father dies and it wasn't yet collected, and it hadn't yet been collected. So the Gemara says, Shani Hasan, that Rav Yosef says, okay, Rav Yosef draws a distinction. And he says, that case over there is different. The Amakra, the case specifically by the young girl, by the Nara, is different than every other case. Because there, we're going to say it goes to the brothers, because there it goes to the daughter to collect. Because it says, it says there that the man gives to the father of the adolescent girl 50 silver coins. In that case specifically, the Torah says the father gets it only from the time of the giving. And when Rabbah said that it's considered compensatory to bequeath it to all the children, yeah, that's only bishar kenasas. That's only by all other penalties, but not by this penalty, not by an adolescent girl. So by all other penalties, once it was ruled that way in court before it's collected, it becomes the brothers. But in this case, it goes specifically. It can be inherited by the brothers, but in this case specifically, it goes to the daughter and not to the other brothers. The Gemara says, well, if that's the case, you want to say maybe by a slave also, where if your ox kills a slave, maybe there too, the Kanas, since there's the word yitain, hachinami, yitain, so there too, maybe also that's an exception, and it should only go to the brothers if the father had actually collected it. The Gemara says, no, there it says, yitain l'chud v'nasa l'chud. But the word yitain is not the same as v'nasan, it's not the same limud. Gemara says, ihachi talmud omar, if that's the case, where it says v'chifeish, why does it say that the kanas doesn't apply in this case, where it says talmud v'chifeish, meaning to say, Rashi says, "B'tmiya komer my area the nasav ha'ashas of Torah mi v'chifeish ki yechid yal shar kanasos." Why does the Shas use to say that she's exempt? That in the case on the bottom of Rabbi Shimon's position, it says that it says v'chichesh. So why is this the source of the idea that there's no carbon shvua? Why did Rabbi Shimon say in the Brisa that the source that there's no carbon shvua in a case where she was amda badin comes from v'chichesh? Talmud Omer v'nasami, by the way, it should say that the source for it is because v'nasan. Rabbi Shimon should have warned out that the knas and the ones mefata is not chayav a carbon shmua from the fact that it says the word v'nasan, not from the fact that it says the word v'chichesh, because that's the source for it. Amar Rabba, no, ki itzrich v'chichesh kigon. That is teaching us a very specific case. Why do we need the word v'chichesh? It's teaching us this very specific case. Going she'amda badin. She went to court, ubagra, and she became an adult, umeza, and then she died. Tahasam ki kayaris avia mina dida kayaris. Because then we're going to say, because in that case where where specifically she became, it went to the court and she became an adult, and then she died, and under that circumstance, when the father inherits from her, he inherits. And so therefore, that's why it uses the word, v'chichesh, because there the word v'nasan doesn't apply, because he didn't act, because the carbon shvua does not come from the nesina, it comes from the fact that it comes from the word v'chichesh. The Gemara says, Iyachi yatsu elu shehin knas mamonhu. So if that's the case, so why when the price excludes those cases? Why does Rabbi Shimon say excludes those cases that they are kanas? Well, this is no longer a kanas. If it was adjudicated in the court, it's mamon. So Amar Menachem Yitzchak, no, he's excluding yatsu elu sheikaran kanas. It's excluding those cases where the main point and where the source of it all is from the kanas. Okay, we'll stop here. If anybody has any questions, happy to address them. And God willing, we'll